The holiday began with a trip to Herculaneum, one of the principal tourist attractions on the outskirts of Naples. Herculaneum was originally a coastal town and fishing port of around 4,000 inhabitants. Its fate paralleled that of nearby Pompeii when both were destroyed by the eruption of Vesuvius in AD 79. But while Pompeii was buried in a hail of burning pumice stone and ash, Herculaneum, which was closer to the volcano, was drowned in a thick sea of hot mud, about 16 metres or 50 feet deep. This non-burning mud essentially fossilized the town so that fragile items like furniture, clothing and even paper were remarkably well preserved and are now housed in nearby museums. The buried town was discovered in 1709, and amateur excavations were carried out over the next 150 years or more. Serious archaeological work began in 1927 and continues to this day, with the emphasis now being on preserving what has already been excavated rather than searching for new discoveries. From the main gateway, you enter the ruins through what appears to be a moat around the town, but was in fact the ancient shoreline and harbour. It was here in 1980 that archaeologists found some 300 skeletons, the remains of people who had fled to the harbour hoping to escape by sea, only to be overcome by the surge of hot mud. It's perhaps small comfort to learn that their deaths would have been almost instantaneous. It is a touching experience to walk through these ruins and try to imagine the lives of the people who lived and died there. The streets and remains of the buildings give you an impression of the structure and scale of the town, but somehow they can seem bare and impersonal. It's perhaps when you encounter these few remaining examples of the frescoes and mosaics that must have adorned many of the important houses and public buildings of Herculaneum that these ruins come to life as a much more personal space. You begin to empathise with the people who once lived here and created these beautiful works of art. They wanted fine buildings with orchards where they could grow fruit and gardens in which they could relax, just as we do today. Our enjoyment of this ancient site was tempered by the wet weather, which marked the first few days of our holiday, so a drink and a snack were a particularly welcome way of rounding off this visit. Next day we were collected by bus for a trip to Pompeii and Vesuvius. The volcano looked very peaceful, if not subdued, and we hoped it would remain that way for the duration of our visit. In the morning we visited Pompeii. For this visit we were advised to hire a guide, which we did. He turned out to be more talkative than informative, but he did guide us through the main places of interest on the site. Like Herculaneum, Pompeii was buried by the Vesuvius eruption of AD 79. But where Herculaneum was a town, Pompeii was a city, so the ruins are much more extensive. At the time of the eruption, it has been estimated that around 20,000 people lived in and around Pompeii. The city lay buried for 1,700 years before its accidental discovery in 1748. Since then, it has been excavated to provide us with an exceptional insight into the architecture and way of life of the ancient Romans who inhabited it. It was a flourishing resort for Rome's most distinguished citizens. Elegant houses and elaborate villas lined its paved streets. In the lower part of the city, these streets showed no ruts, since this approach to them was too steep for wheeled carriages. but they were marked by these small white stones intended to reflect moonlight and guide the residents through the streets at night. Just off this street on the left is the Temple of Apollo, the largest and most important religious building in the city. There were 48 of these Doric columns in the temple, originally topped by an architrave like this one. In this corner is a copy of a statue representing Apollo. The original, now in the Naples Museum of Archaeology, was apparently found in this position. Leaving the temple, you come to this wide open plaza called the Forum, with Vesuvius in the background as a reminder of the city's fate. Off the plaza were shops and trading stalls. One of these buildings has been converted to a store for some of the artefacts and figures that have been found on the site. In the street at the opposite side of the Forum is this building called the Herculaneum. It was the main food market where meat and fish were sold. Excavation of the area within this circle of columns shows that it was the location used for gutting and boning fish. In a corner of the Herculaneum are these glass cases housing two bodies that had been entombed by the volcanic ash. A grim reminder of the fate suffered by Pompeii's citizens. Along the streets there are enough remaining walls, columns and other features to enable the mind to imagine what the ancient city may have looked like. Sadly, the same cannot be said for its artwork. Paintings, mosaics, sculptures and other artefacts were removed from the site by the aristocracy of the day, though some have now found their way into the Archaeological Museum of Naples. A few examples can still be seen in their original locations, and having seen the richness of this artwork, one is left to speculate on just how much has been lost. We left Pompeii by a route overlooking these gardens, where we had another reminder of the close proximity of Vesuvius, our next destination. Vesuvius lies about 6 miles to the east of Naples, so it was back onto the bus for our trip to this location. Buses deposit visitors at a car park high on the volcano where there are food, drink and souvenir stalls, as well as the office where you buy the ticket that gives you access to the summit. From here, it's a relatively short walk to the crater up a wide track with fine views over the mountainside. Volcanologists describe Vesuvius as a stratovolcano. Loosely speaking, this means that it has erupted many times and deposited material in layers that have gradually built up to give it its steep, conical shape. It is sometimes described, comfortingly, in the tourist literature as a dormant volcano. Closer reading indicates that dormant just means that it's not doing very much at the moment. This might be because it has gone to sleep for good, which seems unlikely. The alternative explanation is that while there is little activity at its surface, deep underground the magma chamber that drives it is building up a head of steam for another spectacular eruption. And this seems to be what the experts are anticipating. The AD 79 eruption sent up a deadly cloud of stones, ash and molten rock to a height of 20 miles at a rate of 1.5 million tons every second, ultimately releasing 100,000 times the heat energy delivered by the bombing of Hiroshima. It also deposited so much material within the local area that Pompeii, which, like Herculaneum, used to be by the sea with its own harbour, is now several miles from the coast. It's hard for us to imagine a natural disaster on such a vast scale. Today you can look down into the deep crater, which is eerily quiet. Only a few wisps of steam remind you that volcanic activity is still going on here. And the souvenir stalls high on the rim of the crater give the place an air of quiet settlement, which may be shattered one day in the future as it was in the past. The only reassurance is that Vesuvius is the most closely monitored volcano anywhere in the world, so that if another eruption does occur, we should get plenty of advance warning. Well, let's hope so.